In this tutorial, we're going to use the Foxfire Setup Wizard to access the Northwind database, a sample database found in SQL Server, Access, and Visual Fox Pro. Under the Tools menu, there's a Setup Wizard option. Select this option to start the Setup Wizard. You're presented with a welcome screen that identifies the various steps that you're going to be going through. Click Next to continue. The first step is to name your application. Foxfire will create a brand new preference set for this application and create separate data files for your requests, joins, and data items. So I'm going to type in Northwind, and you'll notice that it automatically gives an abbreviation for your application using 4 letters. These 4 letters are used because Foxfire will then actually create individual files for each one of these items. Nort item for data items, Nort join for relationships, Nort RQST for requests, and Nort groups for request groups. You can also identify in this step if you want this to be Foxfire Startup Application and the data source of where your data is located. In this case, we're going to choose ODBC data source because we're going to be pulling the information from our SQL Server database. Now you're about to set up the remote data source. You can identify different connections. So you can identify how Foxfire is going to access this ODBC connection. Will it run whenever Foxfire is open? Only when processing requests? As required, so it will basically leave it open at all times? Or if you're going to provide an external connection in your code. Typically we're going to use whenever Foxfire is open. I choose from the data source. Here's a listing of all of the valid ODBC data sources on my system. And I choose Northwind. Check off the option that you'd like to use, if you'd like to use the user ID and password, or if you'd like to use the connection string. Either one. If you use the connection string, then you're actually able to use OLEDB drivers as well. So I'm going to put in the user connection and password. Now at this point in time, I actually have to click Connect before I can click on Next. This is because Foxfire must create a connection to the database before it can move forward. You'll also notice this area down below called Display SQL Warnings to Users. Typically, whenever Foxfire runs, if it encounters an error in the SQL that was generated, or if there's a problem with a timeout, it won't always display it to the user unless you have this option selected. You can also use these options to identify what default options you'd like to have for timeouts and for how the information is being transferred over your network. Foxfire then identifies what tables you want to report on. You'll see on the listing on the left-hand side of all of the tables and views that are available in the database. To select them, just double-click or click on one and choose Load. When you double-click on one, you'll be presented with a dialog that allows you to specify an alias name. An alias name is just like it is in FoxPro. It's simply another term that you might use. Typically, SQL Server databases use very usable names, such as customers or employees and orders, so there's really not much need to change them, but you are able to do so. In this case, I'm going to click this option that says don't show this dialog again, so we won't see it. Now I move over Orders, Order Details, and Products. These are 4 key tables of what I want to work with. We'll look at how we can add the other ones in another tutorial. When I click on Next, I am now able to specify the relationships between the data files. Now, there are a few options that are available to me here. I can manually go through and set up each individual relationship by choosing customers, orders, and you take a long process going through each one. Or, instead, I can use the new Foxfire Relationship Editor and the Relationship Finder to do this. So in this case, I'm going to check off this option called Set Up Relations and just click Next. I'm now near the very end of the setup. Basically, it's providing me some basic information over. It's telling me the application name. I can specify here if this is going to be Foxfire Startup Application or not. This allows for when the user first starts up Foxfire, this is the actual preference set that they will see instead of the sample data set. I can identify how many data files it's going to be loading and the relationships that I've already created. In this case, because I've checked off the option to start the Foxfire Relationship Editor, it appears on this screen here. Now when I click on Finish, I get prompted one more time. It's just an added step just to make sure you're absolutely sure that you are ready to create Foxfire to create the preference set. Once you've created this preference set, the only way you can remove it is by editing the preference set and deleting it. In this case, we're going to choose Yes. And now, because we chose to start the Foxfire Relationship Editor, we are now in the Relationship Finder in Foxfire. From this dialog, I can move these items around and make them a little bit in better position for what I want to do. And then I can simply draw relationships between them. So in this case, I'm going to draw a relationship between customers and orders. And it immediately puts a link between it. Now, if I put my mouse over it, I can actually see that this is going to be linking based on customer ID in customers to customer ID in orders. If there was some ambiguity, it'll also let us know. So I'm going to click at relationship between order details, and then finally between order details and products. Now, when I select it between order details and products, it has identified that there are there's more than one way to connect the two tables. And so what it does is it lists off for us the common fields. In this case, we have a common field of product ID and unit price. Well, unit price is probably not the right field that we want to connect these two tables on, so I'm going to choose product ID and click on OK. And now the relationship has been built. When I click on OK, I can see a visual representation of all of the relationships, so I can see that the relationships go from customers to orders, orders into order details, and order details into products. Now when I click on Exit, I'm back in the Request Manager for my new preference set. If I click on New, I can create new requests. If I click on Dictionary, I'll see the items. And if I go under Tools and choose Preference Sets, I can now see my new application, Northwind, ready for use. And that's how you can use the Foxfire setup to set up Foxfire specifically for your application.